Welcome. This lesson is on the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is a prophet of the captivity. In other words, he's on the other side of the fall of Jerusalem. When Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, he took 10,000 leaders, skilled laborers, and soldiers back to Babylon with him, along with all the riches of the temple and the king's palace. He only left behind the poor people that he didn't have any use for. So Ezekiel would have been among the 10,000 taken captive into Babylon. And then 5 years later, Ezekiel is called to be a prophet to the Jewish exiles in Babylon. According to Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1, he was about 30 years old at the time of his calling, which is, as we've seen, in line with the Jewish custom of when a man begins his career. According to Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 3, Ezekiel came from a priestly family. The name Ezekiel means God will strengthen, and he was the son of Buzi, and the name Buzi means disrespect, despised, and shamed. That may sound a little odd. How does that name relate to anything good about Ezekiel's purpose or his father's way of training him? Well, the meaning likely relates to how the Jewish people felt about being in exile. They felt disrespected, despised, and shamed. But if they'll listen, God will use Ezekiel to strengthen them in their time of captivity, until God returns them back to Jerusalem. But unfortunately, the people didn't listen to Ezekiel. Like all of the prophets, his ministry is hard. In Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 7, God tells Ezekiel, "Yet the house of Israel will not be willing to listen to you, since they are not willing to listen to me. Surely the whole house of Israel is stubborn and obstinate." And one Jewish tradition says that Ezekiel was murdered by an Israelite prince whose idolatry he rebuked. Part of Ezekiel's call is a vision. It contains some very strange things which Ezekiel saw. Here's one part of it in Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 14 through 21. "And the living beings ran to and fro like bolts of lightning. Now as I looked at the living beings, behold, there was one wheel on the earth beside the living being. For each of the four of them, the appearance of the wheels and their workmanship was like sparkling beryl, and all four of them had the same form, their appearance and workmanship being as if one wheel were within another. Whenever they moved in any of the four directions without turning as they moved. And as for their rims, they were lofty and awesome, and the rims of all four of them were full of eyes round about. Whenever the living beings moved, the wheels moved with them, and whenever the living beings rose from the earth, the wheels rose also. Wherever the Spirit was about to go, they would go in that direction, and the wheels rose close beside them, for the Spirit of the living beings was in the wheels. Wherever those went, they went, and whenever those stood still, these stood still. And whenever those rose from the earth, the wheels rose close beside them, for the Spirit of the living beings was in the wheels." This description is so strange that in the 1970s, and yes, I'm old enough to remember that, there was a popular book called The Chariots of the Gods. And the author speculated in that book that Ezekiel is recording one of the first human sightings of UFOs. But Ezekiel saw no such thing. Imagine trying to describe things of heaven that have no earthly counterpart or anything to compare them to. For example, how would you describe seeing a color that doesn't exist on this earth? You couldn't say to someone, well, it's kind of like purple, or it's something like red, because it wouldn't be like any known color. So that would be pretty tough to describe. Regardless, we know Ezekiel was seeing into the heavenly or the spiritual realm. In fact, in Ezekiel 1 verse 24, Ezekiel hears the voice of the Almighty. And in chapter 1 verse 28, he describes God as having an appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. That ought to be a good enough interpretation for us of what Ezekiel saw. The book of Ezekiel is divided into three major sections. Chapters 1 through 24 include prophecies against Judah and Jerusalem. Chapters 25 through 32 include prophecies against the foreign nations. And in Ezekiel chapters 33 through 48, Ezekiel offers prophecies of hope, salvation, and restoration. It is in this last section that Ezekiel, like Jeremiah, prophesies about the new covenant. In Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 26 through 28, he says, "Moreover, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. And I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you will be careful to observe my ordinances, so you will be my people, and I will be your God." That's a great example of describing the new covenant which is to come. Ezekiel is also referenced in the book of Revelation more than in any other New Testament book. In Revelation chapter 20, verse 8, it refers back to Ezekiel's chapter 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog. And in Revelation chapter 21 and 22, it refers back to passages in Ezekiel chapters 40 through 43. Finally, I think because Ezekiel describes vision he had with words that make them difficult to fully understand because there was no comparison or something to compare them to on earth, it made us hard to relate to them. God also uses a lot of symbolism in Ezekiel's ministry. So we could say that Ezekiel is an actor in a sense. His prophecies are like a drama, a skit, or a play. So he acts out his prophecies symbolically. In other words, what he does or performs in his prophecies serves as a way to present or teach the meaning of his prophecies. Some examples of Ezekiel acting out prophecies and the related meaning to those prophecies are this. For one, God had Ezekiel lay down on his left side for 390 days. Now, I don't think that Ezekiel laid down for 390 full days straight in a row. Sounds kind of enticing to do, but it also could be kind of lazy. What was more likely the case was that every day he would lie down on his left side as a demonstration for a brief period of time. So the meaning of lying down for 390 days was that each day represented 1 year of Israel's sin against God leading up to their exile. Then at another occasion, he laid down on his right side for 40 days. And each day represented 1 year of Judah's sin against God, leading up to their exile. So that's acting. It's a symbolic way to demonstrate a reality, a truth that God was trying to communicate prophetically to his people. He also acted out a strange demonstration in which he shaved his head and beard. And then he burned 1/3 of the hair. He struck 1/3 of the hair with a sword, and he scattered 1/3 of his hair to the wind. Well, Ezekiel himself reveals the symbolism behind these acts. His dramatic presentation represents the fall of Judah and how their destruction took place. 1/3 died by plague or famine, the burning. 1/3 died by the sword or war, that's striking them with a sword. And 1/3 were scattered as exiles, that's scattering them, the hairs to the wind. In that light, I have a symbolic prophecy for you middle schoolers. See if you can interpret what it means.